tell us about yourself growing up and how you got into procurement.
Oh gosh, that's a very good question. I mean, one of the things that always amazes me today is always when people make an apology for finding themselves stumbling into procurement and wanting to make it a career. I actually wanted to do it from the get-go, so I was
Oh, wow.
very, very fortunate, because what happened in my career was that I had someone that kind of inspired me, and he was worked for JCB, the factory people, the excavator people,
Hmm.
and he took me for a tour when I was 16, 17 around the factory. I thought, wow, this is so interesting how they do all this and unify all the componentry so they can build these things. And we got talking about procurement and supply chain. I thought, well, that's definitely a place that I'd want to make my career. So as you do, I muddled through A levels, was able to get onto a degree course at Coventry University, and I did a couple of placements. I worked at Rover Cars, Massey Ferguson, the tractor manufacturers, and then finished up at Rolls-Royce Aerospace in procurement and supply chain. And it was just an area that fascinated me. So that's what I did straight out of university, really. And then through the course of my career, just kind of graduated through a number of procurement roles, but find it really one of the most, I mean, I would say this now, having done it for so long, but one of the most important parts of a business is the ability to run its supply chain, buy products and services that you ultimately sell customers. I think it's a really thrilling role to be in. So that's really, in a nutshell, my journey. And then did a master's degree at Birmingham University, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Always been in procurement at that point. Then I went to go and work for T-Mobile, and procurement supply chain is a bit of an interchangeable term, because a lot of people, in my mind, supply chain's about that process of getting goods and services and shipping them and delivering them to customers. Some people use it to describe the procurement process. What happened was, after my master's degree, I persuaded T-Mobile to let me run their handset supply chain, which is the first time I'd had a kind of big operational role, and again, thoroughly enjoyed it. So I've always kind of done this kind of up and down of procurement or deep supply chain. I did that at Pearson for 3 years most recently, and then took a bit of time out, did a bit of advisory work, and then landed at Kantar in April last year.
Well, first and foremost, you're probably the first person I've spoken to who said that you set out with a plan to get into procurement. Most people didn't know about procurement growing up, or even in university, and fell into it. So that's really interesting to understand that you had some early exposure to it. So what was it about the early exposure that you saw that made you think, I'd like to do that?
Well, I could see from a very early age that obviously, if you're building things, then that's entirely dependent on the quality of the things arriving in a timely way, to quality, to time. Then the process of being able to synchronize all of that into a manufacturing process, and then the ability to then get it out the door and into the hands of the customers. And I just thought, if you think of the ecosystem that you need to do all of those things, you need great suppliers, you need great planning and forecasting, and you need great supply chain. And I suppose my interest in that hit a point when supply chain and procurement started to have a lot more prominence in a lot of businesses, whether it was lean manufacturing, the notion that, building very dependent relationships with suppliers. And I think that over the course of the past 30 years of my career, we saw an enormous outsourcing of either things that companies used to produce and manufacture for themselves, or for that matter, they started to move offshore a lot of manufacturing activities, mainly to China. So my career, I think, I suppose, landed at a time when there's been enormous change in supply chain. And as I turned 50 last year, I think what I'll see in the final part of my career is a similar change and transformation, because we've got an enormous environmental agenda now to resolve and deal with. I think supply chain procurement's critical component to that. I think we've got supply chain security to think about in the future. And then naturally, James, we've got the fallout of the COVID crisis. I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of supplier risk, because I think a lot of suppliers will struggle to get back to where they were pre-crisis, and there's going to be an enormous amount of work, I think, in terms of how businesses respond to those challenges going forward. So, I started my career with enormous change. I think I'll end my career with enormous change as well.
And for someone like yourself, Steve, who's worked in both procurement and supply chain and bounced between the two, do you have a preference which one you prefer to work in? And for the benefit of those watching who are not in procurement or supply chain yet, but considering it as a career, how would you describe them as different business units?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I've enjoyed both, to be honest with you. So I don't think one's a favourite child over the other. I've just been very fortunate to get involved in both, really, at certain times in my career or with certain opportunities that companies have presented me with. So I think the bigger question or the bigger point I would make is, I think the skills between both disciplines are very interchangeable, because really what it's about at the end of the day is relationships that you build with people, relationships you build with suppliers, relationships that you build with your internal stakeholders. It's about that kind of understanding of that universe of the supply chain that you're operating in. And then finally, it's thinking about how you can leverage the technology that we have these days to really transform the operating performance. I think we've seen enormous technology advances in terms of supply chain. You think about how we used to buy things in the past, and now how a large chunk of us are just buying stuff online and getting it delivered. Enormous physical supply chain changes, but also I tell you, the power of data analytics is changing the way we think about the procurement process as well. So we can automate huge parts of very transactional procurement and really use the capabilities that we have to really build relationships with stakeholders to help them build the best relationships with suppliers they can.
Brilliant answer. And then fast forwarding to your current role as Chief Procurement Officer of Kantar, for the benefit of the audience, could you give us an overview of Kantar and what it is, and also how your procurement function fits into Kantar?
Yeah, I mean, Kantar is a data science business, really, I'd like to think. And what we do is provide brands around the world with insights about what customers are thinking about their brands, what the consumer sentiment is about certain categories of spend, how consumers think about the reputation of your brand, and how you're portrayed in the marketplace. And you can well imagine, I'm sure, that a lot of companies are leaning in at the moment, because what they really want to understand is, how has consumer sentiment changed, and where are people focusing their dollars, their consumable dollars, and what do they think about brands out there in the marketplace. Good example I like to cite is the category of hygiene, so things that we use to clean the house. For a long time, that was considered a bit of a category of grocery spend that was in a bit of kind of, dare I say, commoditization. Well, in 12 months, suddenly it's become one of the hottest categories of spend, and you're seeing a kind of big reinvention of how that category is developed. So that's the type of things that we do. We're moving like everybody. So large parts of how we collate that data is what I call analog. So we have people out there collecting insights for us and collecting data and things like that. And that's now moving more into a kind of digital world, which means that our business is on a big path to transform its operating processes, its technology, its infrastructure estate, and how it goes to market. And I'd like to think that procurement's got a big role to play in that. So we were part of the WPP family. We left them last year. I beg your pardon, in 2019. Last year was the full year that we were a standalone organisation. And really what I've been doing is setting up our own standalone procurement organisation with really three parts. One is categories of expertise that we want to purchase and leverage. Then regions, so making sure that we can source those categories of spend in a way that is sympathetic to the needs of the local markets. And then a whole capability around enablement. So what's the technology, systems, reporting, and cadence that we use to run and operate our function.
And how big is your team at present, Steve?
Well, I inherited two, and we're going to go to a team of between 30 and 40 people.
Wow. So big growth plans then.
Yes, yeah, it is. But with that growth plan is also a big expectation around savings as well.
Absolutely. And you've touched upon COVID a little bit, and I'm sure Brexit will no doubt come into this conversation at some point. What are some of the challenges your team is currently facing?
Well, I think on the COVID one, I mean, I think that it's been in a couple of ways. I think, and it's a bit like our own personal lives, you know, waves of concern and worry, then kind of optimism, and then it kind of drops off again as we face another wave, and then optimism again and a wave. So I think one of the big leadership challenges is just keeping people centered, and kind of focused on what they need to do, but making sure that, you know, they feel supported both physically. You know, sitting in front of screens every day isn't the best thing to be doing. So physically they feel supported, and then they feel that they've got pressure valves, you know, get out, go for a walk, get some fresh air and all that kind of stuff. So that's one of the big challenges. The second thing is, of course, in the way that I've just described, the setting up of the team, kind of driving that transformation remotely is a challenge, because, you know, it's just not about building the team, it's also about building those relationships with stakeholders, where in a normal world you'd like to meet them for the first time and build some empathy and some relationships, and again that's all been done very remotely. So that's been a challenge as well. And then identifying what the areas and savings of opportunity are that we can go after as well is also a kind of very significant piece of work as well. So they're all of the things, really, kind of rich basket of challenges and opportunities.
Fantastic. And Steve, you've no doubt had a long and glittering career up until your current role in procurement. At this point in your career, what are you most passionate about when it comes to procurement?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things. Number one is in the way that I started my journey and my enthusiasm to go into that day one. I still would have a point of view that says that I don't think it's necessary. If you ask a number of grads or kids out of school where they'd like to go to their career, it might be finance, might be marketing, might be sales. I think procurement is still a poor relative. So I think, despite the undoubted prominence that it's been given over the course of the past many years, I still think it doesn't get the marketing that it deserves in terms of being a destination career that you want to join. Secondly, you know, I'll come back to the topic of diversity and inclusion. I think it's still the case that a large number of procurement professionals are male, and I don't think we've made anything like the strides that other professions have done in terms of broadening the depth and the capability of the diversity. And I think also, more delicately, I think racial diversity as well. Again, you know, there's not many people of ethnic origin in procurement either. So I think we've got an enormous amount of work to do if we're really to set ourselves up as a really far-thinking kind of destination career that young, energetic people want to go into. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, I think, in the way that I described my ability to move between procurement and supply chain, I think the same holds true in terms of people moving horizontally across their career as well. So I think, you know, we should be encouraging people to move in and out of different functions into our universe, so they get a better sense of what it is that we contribute. I think that's super important as well. So I think, you know, they're the key things as I reflect on my career that I want to focus on in the course of the next several years as I drive the transformation here at Kantar.
And that leads us really nicely on to the next question, Steve, around key focus areas for procurement as a whole. You've touched on quite a few of them there. Are there any further areas that you think procurement as a function really needs to focus on in the coming years?
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, in the era, in the course of 30 years, you know, we as a function, we've been very successful, I think, of reducing year over year the costs of the things that we buy and sell. I can't help but think that opportunity to take cost out is slowly coming to an end, because in truth it was very dependent on exploiting China and low cost sourcing in China, and to some degree low cost sourcing in India from a services perspective. I think if anything, the COVID crisis has taught us that actually you do need things a little bit closer. One of the challenges I think will be that if you want to bring things closer, what's the supply chain that you have in your local markets that can support the way you want to run and operate your business? So I think there's going to be a whole reinvention of the supply chain and the ecosystem to support our businesses over the course of the next several years as we adjust the posture relative to the kind of macro challenges around trade wars, security, and the lessons that we've learned with COVID. So that's one thing for sure that I think is a big area for change, no doubt.
Fantastic. That's really interesting, Steve, because I've had a number of conversations over the past year, ever since COVID hit, really, about globalization and how we've been expanding and becoming this global economy, and how perhaps now it's time to go back and make our worlds a little bit smaller. And do you think that will ultimately be a good thing for particularly this country?
I mean, I suppose where you want to go a little bit is on Brexit, but of course the whole raison d'etre of being Brexit was that we are a much more kind of global country. Time will tell whether that plays out or not. But we are in the middle of a big trade war. I mean, let's not forget we've got the US very aggressively applying tariffs to China, and conversely China doing the same thing. The US is applying those trade tariffs to Europe as well. So we do live in a world where, you know, what we took for granted, I think, over the course of the past many years about the free movement of goods and services and kind of that globalization you described, I think we took great advantage of that. But clearly, you know, governments are changing their frame of reference on that. In response, in some cases, I think, to the fact that wealth in many countries has been unevenly spread. You know, there's lots of Rust Belt states in North America where, you know, their heavy manufacturing is completely dissipated, and it pivoted towards globalization as the thing that destroyed those jobs. And, you know, we've seen what the political fallout of that has been. So I do think that those trade wins are going to be in front of us for the foreseeable future. How that plays out is that I think we will see more onshoring or more nearshoring, undoubtedly. As I said, it presupposes there's a supply chain there that can take that demand. I don't think we should take that for granted. I think we have to reinvent manufacturing capacity. But then, you know, large parts of our economy these days are digital products and services. So that's going to be fascinating to see how that works in a world where you've got trade embargoes and things like that. And you'll notice, I think, that the majority of the trade embargoes that have been applied, or the tariffs, have primarily been on physical products. I don't recall a point in time at the moment where that's been applied to digital products or services or content for that matter. But time will tell.
Okay. And then moving back to your team, what do you look for when hiring somebody, Steve?
Well, not the same version of me, that's for sure. One of the things that you learn in your career is one of the ways of building diversity is also cognitive diversity. So you've got to kind of encourage and be receptive enough as a leader to build a bunch of people that are prepared to challenge you and question some of the things that are being done. And I think I will tell you that that's been a learning in my career. I'm sure when I was very early on as a line manager, I would have wanted people to have seen things exactly as I saw them. But I think as you get more experience, you just understand that actually that's okay, but actually having a couple of people that are prepared to challenge is in fact really, really important. Kind of changes your frame of reference and how you think about problems or issues that need to be resolved. So I look for people that are different, people that have got wider experience, energy, enthusiasm, you know, willingness to get involved and be part of something special that hopefully we're building at Kantar.
Brilliant. Now, sustainability is high on a lot of procurement functions' agenda, and it's something that you and I have spoken about a few times. What are you guys doing in terms of sustainability at present?
Yeah, there's two parts of that really. So the first part of sustainability is how you think about our carbon footprint, and by and large, we're either one or two things: office buildings or data centers. Our travel actually has gone down quite significantly, as you can imagine, over the course of the past 18 months. And one of the things that we think that we won't see is anything like the level of corporate travel that we've seen historically. So we'll put that to one side for the moment. So actually, we're just about to start a big audit of what we think our current occupancy carbon emission is, and then begin to start looking at ways in which we can adjust for that, either by investing in the physical infrastructure, reducing the size of the space that we use, because of course we've also got more of our workforce working in a much more flexible way, like you and I are talking today. And we are just kind of pondering, so how do you measure the effect of having people work from home as well? Because that has an energy emitting component to it as well. I suppose that if you're to do the full soup to nuts view of what your business is generating and creating, you need to factor that in as well. If anybody's got any ideas about how to do that, I'm all ears.
Great stuff. What would you say is the biggest achievement in your procurement career so far, Steve? Put you on the spot here.
Wow. Gosh, I mean, I could be really cheap and say there's been so many, I wouldn't know where to begin. But probably the biggest success is the fact I've been able to make it to CPL. I mean, I still amaze myself that I was able to been able to achieve that, to be honest with you. So good achievements. I mean, we did. Gosh, again, you know, I've seen so many in my career. I mean, I would say that a couple of things. You know, T-Mobile, we were the first major network to offer next day delivery on
Wow.
telesales, would you believe, going back 15 years. And at the time, that was remarkable. You could place an order by 8 o'clock and you get it the next day. I mean, there were not many companies that were able to do that. And
No.
now, you know, we've got Amazon that can place an order and deliver it same day. So, you know, so that was a great thing. When I worked for Vodafone in Romania, we sourced kind of low cost handset in China as part of the overall Vodafone group efforts. And that was fabulous because it allowed us to really grow the population of people that used Vodafone services in Romania because we had low cost handsets. For those people that know, the Vodafone procurement company was something that I was involved in, helped with a guy called Detlef Schultz, Ninian Wilson, Tim Williams, Dominic Russo. You know, I was a very junior part of trying to figure out how that operating model would work, and then was very fortunate to then spend a couple of years in Luxembourg as well. So that was very, very enjoyable. So yeah, some really enjoyable things that I've done.
And did you have any mentors or procurement leaders that you looked up to who perhaps influenced you in any way or saw something?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of well-known people. I mean, Detlef Schultz would be one, Ninian Wilson would be another, Tim Williams. I mean, these were always people that I was very fortunate to get to meet and learn from, and just see how they did things and kind of just understand their point of view and things and get tackled. And I think that what if I can be so kind of bold as to offer one piece of advice, is make sure that you get the opportunity to get exposed to good leaders, because you really learn a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
In terms of how they do deal with issues, how they resolve things, how they think about the world. So that's been very, very important for me. I mean, I was very, very fortunate when I was at T-Mobile. I worked for a woman called Liliana Solomon, very audacious finance director that had the courage of a lion, and she drove such enormous change. And again, I saw how she interacted, and you know, just learning from good business leaders really, I think is the key. And just think about how you take what you learn from them and think about how you build that into your own kind of reservoir of ideas and approaches of how to tackle issues.
And what do you think makes a good procurement leader, Steve?
Well, definitely somebody that can engage with the business, and undoubtedly, you might be surprised to hear, I don't think you have to be the best negotiator, because I think there's always better negotiators out there, and in fact, that's the trick, right? You have to build those negotiators in your team. I think that one of the most important things is being able to engage with business stakeholders up and down the organization and understand what their requirements are, what they need from procurement, and figuring a way in terms of building a solution that meets their requirements and helps you as a function be successful.
Fantastic. And going right to the other end of the spectrum, for somebody embarking on a new procurement career, what advice would you give?
Throw yourself into everything. I mean, I started my career as a scheduler. So scheduler is like the bottom rung of the ladder, but it's probably the where you learn where everything in a supply chain that goes wrong does go wrong. And you're on the phone speaking to the factories or the suppliers or the logistics companies trying to coordinate things. So just throw yourself into roles that are going to let you learn about how businesses run and operate. Don't worry undoubtedly I was kind of very early on very worried about where my career was going. Was I moving quick enough? Was it happening quick enough and all that kind of stuff? But the thing in reality was actually what served me better was not whether my career was moving on, but was I learning new stuff? And was I picking up new skills, getting experiences and exposures to new things? And I think if you pivot your way around that, rather than whether you're moving up the ladder quick enough, moving up the ladder will take care of itself if you're building up new skills, new capabilities, and getting involved in new projects.
It's really interesting, Steve, because I've had this conversation a few times with other procurement leaders, and I think there's a trend in this day and age for people to want to progress too quickly and to move from company to company before they've actually mastered their role. What would your thoughts be on that?
Well, I don't think there's a definitive point of view there, to be honest with you. Like I said, I mean, I think you can get into a mindset that says your career is not moving with the trajectory that you want, and certainly if you're very competitive with your friends, sometimes you can create some competition there. But now I can give some perspective from the fact I'm a CPO, so maybe that I'm now telling everybody, cool down, it does happen, but I made it, so to speak. So I'm very conscious that my advice may sound a bit disingenuous. I don't think it's longevity is not necessarily the issue these days in careers. I think it's what you're contributing, the projects you're engaging in, and what you're leaving behind as a legacy. And if you're learning stuff, you're contributing positively to a business, and you're leaving a legacy where they had you in well regard and were grateful for what you contributed, then if it's 18 months, 2 years, or 3 years, I don't think it matters. But just remind yourself though that you do need to give back. So it's just not all about what you want; it's also what you're contributing to help those businesses move forward and be successful as well.
Brilliant answer. This last section, Steve, is less about procurement and business and more just about you. So what do you like to get up to in your spare time? Do you have any favorite books, films, hobbies, or holiday destinations?
Well, as a father of 4 children, you can probably expect what the majority of my efforts are. But if you look at my bookcase, I've got a fair list of interesting history books there. I mean, one is on Hitler and Stalin, which I'm not sure is a particularly good shelf book to have. But I'm a big historian buff, to be honest with you. So that's what I enjoy, and I certainly hope that before my time is up on this world, one of my big ambitions is to do a history degree. So I kind of want to do that as part of my retirement plan. But history, big passion of mine.
Is there any particular area of history that you're more interested in?
Europe from kind of 1920 to 1950.
Nice.
Because it was a period of immense change for us all, really, and it sowed the scenes for the European Union, which I think has been a good force for change, regardless of the decisions that we made with Brexit. Prior to that point in time, Europe had been at war with each other many times over several hundred years, and we've lived through a period of relative peace. So that's it. Really, pretty straightforward. No, nothing flamboyant.
Great stuff. And if you could give any advice to your younger self, Steve, what would it be?
Enjoy the journey. I think, as we said, which was a bit disingenuous, I suppose, but as I said to anybody that's listening to this and thinking about their career, as I've tried to move up the ladder, I was always kind of focused on what the next thing was, didn't necessarily take the moment to enjoy sometimes what I was doing. So just make sure you enjoy the journey.
Mm. And do you have any interesting facts that you can tell us about yourself? This is a
I
difficult
once
put you on
I
this.
once stopped Boris Becker from getting into Wimbledon when I was a security guard there because he didn't have his player ID pass. I'm very proud of the fact that I followed the letter to the law as instructed by my boss at the time, but it did mean that I spent the rest of the Wimbledon Championships parked out guarding the rubbish trucks.
That's one of the more interesting ones for sure. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. The other one, just very briefly, is that we lived in Romania for 3 years, and Romania's got a big film studio complex, which most people don't know. And we in the family were traveling back to the UK for a weekend, and I bumped into somebody in the airport. I was absolutely thought I went to school with this guy, so I started chatting to him, and so just someone I really thought, oh, I know who this is. And the guy replied to me in an American accent, and it turned out to be Wendy Harrison.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was very embarrassing because I thought it was someone I went to school with, but clearly it wasn't.
That's amazing. And last but not least, Steve, do you have a personal motto that you live by, or words that kind of give you some comfort, especially in these tumultuous times?
Uh, I mean, there's tons of stuff there. One of the ones I learned from a guy called Guy Lawrence, and he was at Vodafone, and now he's the CEO of Chelsea. He said that simplicity is the very art of sophistication. And I think we all know supply chains and procurement can be incredibly complicated, difficult stuff to convey. I think one of the tricks is if you can really boil it down into a way that people can really get it, that's half the battle.